A meta-analysis of Daniel Nathal's work has thankfully not detected any plagiarism. The algorithm did, however, detect a more troubling phenomenon, whereby the presentations appear like liberal speeches, but only when played backwards like 1980s heavy metal music. Parents, be advised, this is the Daniel Nathal Show. Why do we always think in terms of national elections, when it's local elections that make all the difference in our lives? The reason for this is rooted in a conflict that erupted early on in our nation's history, the struggle between America's identity as states or as the Union. In the original republic, we were a confederation of sovereign states, like many countries. Each state had its own constitution, its own currency, its own sovereign authority. In America's first draft, they envisioned us as a republic like ancient Greece. They had no capital or king. They were just a disparate scattering of city-states, all with different forms of government. This changed once Alexander the Great conquered Greece and unified them for the first time under an emperor. With newly imposed centralization and centralized taxation, the people were taxed into poverty, a small oligarchical class got fabulously wealthy, and the civilization collapsed, forever afterward to be a slave colony for subsequent empires. In America, the Founding Fathers were originally suspicious of centralization, so they called for a highly decentralized setup. America in its first draft as a pure republic was envisioned less as a monolithic country than as something like the European Union. We weren't the United States, we were these United States. A whole world lays in that distinction. Unfortunately, like other countries, like the ancient Greeks themselves, the states fought against each other, setting up tariffs between themselves and having trade wars. States would also not help each other. If one was attacked, the others would not rally in their defense. One of the solutions for this was to scrap the old Articles of Confederation and to create a new constitution with a more robust federal layer. Once this was in place, people stopped promoting state or regional identities and started promoting a new identity based on the Union. Henry Clay called it Americanism. At the time, it really meant federalism. It's important to remember that before 1865, American citizenship didn't even exist. One was a citizen of Georgia or Pennsylvania or New York, and that's how people thought of themselves, as Georgians or Pennsylvanians or New Yorkers. Certain founding fathers feared this division because it would make America easier to conquer, and they were right. By 1790, we had a new constitution. If we had not had this, then they would surely have fallen once the British reinvaded us in the War of 1812. As a result of the new federal cohesiveness, the states were forced to join together, and they repelled the invasion. As a result of this, many people at the time, like Henry Clay, John Marshall, Alexander Hamilton, and others, promoted the aforementioned Americanism. This meant that one was not supposed to identify with one state, but with the wider country as a whole. And this brings us back to our central question. Why Americans, during elections, tend to think nationally rather than locally, even when it hurts them? And the answer is, we were trained to. After the Civil War, the states were played down and the Union was promoted aggressively. Federalism was seen as the only way to hold a fractious country together. So we went from a really decentralized system to a highly centralized system. Remember, things happen in waves. History is like that. If you read Dante's Divine Comedy in the 1320s, he's constantly complaining about the endless internecine wars between the Italian city-states. They were constantly fighting each other. It went on for centuries. When a German empire emerged, Dante actually made an argument that by uniting under an empire, the individual city-states would be reined in and the fighting would stop. He was right. This is what happens. But what also happens is a loss of freedom. So the sweet spot is existing in the in-between point, between utter sloppy fractious decentralization and stultified slavish hypercentralization. We needed centralization early on to save us from the British in the War of 1812. Ever since then, though, we haven't really had an external enemy threatening us. So we swung too far in the direction of centralization. According to futurist Alvin Toffler in the Third Wave, technology is taking us to a new period of decentralization. Think of it this way. In the past, you had to go to a central location to buy or trade. Think of stock markets or oil bourses in major cities. This is why national capitals arose. Now, in the age of eBay, you can buy or sell in your pajamas from your bedroom. No need to travel to a central location. So technology is eroding centralization. Just as this is happening on the sociological level, it's time for it to start happening on the political level. We need to swing back to taking the focus away from federal elections and spend more time thinking about local sheriff's races, mayor's elections, school board runoffs, etc. This is what really terrifies the oligarchs, whose lifeblood is centralized federalism. This is why they're weaponizing the FBI to go after parents at PTA meetings. They're terrified of people discovering that the real power resides in them taking over their own communities. The illusion was that, like some sucker hoping to win the lottery, we would elect a single president and he would solve all our problems for us. That's not the republic speaking. Thinking like that is thinking that you'd expect to see in a monarchy. In a republic, you are responsible. Why? Because you have the power, not some king, not some president. You. It's both the blessing of the republic and its burden. The German philosopher Hegel said, "There are no rights without responsibilities, and no responsibilities without rights." The concept of leaving everything up to a single man is a holdover from George III in England in 1775. And yes, Hamilton and other founding fathers wanted to base the federal layer of government on England. England was run by a king and a central bank. They wanted the federal layer of government to be run by a president and a central bank. This was a graft over the republic represented by the 13 states underneath. So they grafted a monarchical structure over top of the original republic and told you to ignore the states and instead to embrace federalism, repackaged to you as Americanism. It may be time to retire Americanism and revert to Pennsylvaniaism, to Nevadaism, to Floridaism. We will only get our freedoms back by taking them back. And that won't happen if we only pay attention to national elections like a cat focusing on a laser light that someone jerks around spastically as they laugh at you while you chase your tail. The John Birch Society is one of those organizations that the powers that be fear due to the fact that it helps people act locally. It was the main reason the oligarchs panicked in the 1960s, and they're panicking right now. To find out more about how you can take your country back, go to jbs.org.